When I first laid eyes on the house at Birchwood Drive, it wasn't just the charming exterior or the cozy interior that caught my attention. It was the private lake tucked away behind the property. The realtor called it a hidden gem, and she wasn't wrong. Imagine stepping out of your back door to find a serene, sparkling lake surrounded by tall pine trees. It felt like something out of a dream, a place where you could escape the noise of the world and truly feel at peace. The moment I stood there, gazing at the water, I knew this was it. This was going to be my home, my sanctuary. I imagined lazy summer afternoons paddling around in a kayak, crisp autumn mornings sipping coffee while watching the mist rise off the water, and quiet evenings listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. It was perfect, or so I thought. Fast forward 6 months, and everything changed. One day, as I was enjoying my morning coffee by the lake, I noticed an official-looking envelope lying on my kitchen counter. It was from the Homeowners Association, HOA, the same group responsible for maintaining the neighborhood's charm. At first glance, it seemed harmless enough, just another notice about upcoming events or landscaping guidelines. But as I read through the letter, my heart sank. According to them, while the land surrounding the lake belonged to me, the actual body of water itself was technically classified as common area, under some old subdivision agreement from decades ago. In other words, they claimed it didn't belong solely to me. It belonged to everyone in the neighborhood. Everyone. How could this be possible? I reread the letter 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood. But no, the message was clear. The HOA believed they had the right to access the lake. I couldn't believe it. This lake wasn't just a feature of the property. It was the reason I'd fallen in love with the house in the first place. And now, they were telling me it wasn't entirely mine. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal. They probably just wanted to use it for occasional fishing events or family picnics. Surely, they wouldn't overstep. Right? Wrong. Within weeks, strangers started showing up uninvited. Neighbors I barely knew began wandering onto what I considered my private retreat, casting fishing lines without asking permission, leaving trash scattered along the shoreline, and making noise late into the evening. One Saturday afternoon, I looked out my window to see a man attempting to dock a jet ski near the edge of the lake. The loud engine roared, scaring away every bird within earshot. Another time, I found empty soda cans and snack wrappers littering the grass. Each incident chipped away at my patience and my sense of ownership. Every time I confronted someone, they shrugged it off. It's common property, they'd say, as if that excused their behavior. Common property. To them, maybe. But to me, it was personal. I had poured my savings into this house, dreaming of a peaceful life by the water. Now it felt like I was losing control, not just of the lake, but of my own home. I sent polite reminders to the HOA, asking them to remind residents to respect boundaries. But nothing changed. Instead, I received a response from Patricia, the HOA president, who wrote back with thinly veiled threats. If you continue to obstruct residents' rights, her email said, legal action may become necessary. Legal action. For wanting privacy on my own property. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end quietly. Something had to give. And I wasn't about to let it be me. At first, I told myself it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe the HOA's claim to the lake would amount to nothing more than a few harmless fishing trips or an occasional paddleboat outing. After all, how often could people really want to use the lake? Surely, they'd lose interest once they realized how much effort it took to lug their gear down to the water. But as days turned into weeks, my optimism began to crumble. It started with small things, little annoyances that added up over time. Neighbors I barely recognized started showing up unannounced, parking their cars along my driveway and wandering onto the property like it was some public park. One morning, I woke up to find a family setting up folding chairs and a picnic blanket right by the shore. Another day, I spotted a group of teenagers tossing a football near the water's edge, laughing loudly as if they owned the place. But the real trouble began when the fishing enthusiasts showed up. At first, it was just one or two people casting lines into the lake on weekends. Then it became a regular occurrence. Every time I looked out my window, someone new was there, sitting on the bank with a tackle box beside them. Some even brought portable chairs and coolers, settling in for hours at a time. I didn't mind fishing itself. I actually enjoyed watching the occasional fisherman from afar. But these weren't quiet, respectful visitors. They left behind tangled fishing line, snagged on branches, empty bait containers scattered across the grass, and muddy footprints trailing through areas I'd worked hard to keep pristine. And then there was the noise. Oh, the noise. On weekends especially, the peaceful hum of nature was drowned out by loud conversations, splashing, and sometimes even music blaring from portable speakers. One Saturday afternoon, I stepped outside to see a man revving the engine of his jet ski, sending waves crashing against the shore. The sound echoed through the trees, startling birds and ruining the tranquility I cherished so deeply. When I politely asked him to turn it off, he smirked and said, "Hey, it's a common area. We're allowed to have fun too." That phrase, common area, became a mantra among the neighbors who visited the lake. Whenever I confronted anyone about leaving trash or making too much noise, they'd shrug and repeat those two words as though it excused everything. It didn't matter how many times I reminded them that this was still my property. To them, the lake wasn't mine. It belonged to everyone. And apparently, everyone included people who treated it like their personal playground. The emails and flyers didn't help either. Almost daily, notices arrived in my inbox announcing upcoming events at the community lake. Fishing tournaments, kayaking lessons, stargazing nights. The list went on. Each announcement felt like another nail in the coffin of my once peaceful retreat. Worse yet, none of these events were coordinated with me. People simply assumed they had the right to do whatever they pleased, whenever they pleased. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that conflict wouldn't solve anything. I sent polite reminders to the HOA, asking them to encourage residents to clean up after themselves and respect quiet hours. But instead of addressing the issue, Patricia, the ever-present HOA president, responded with thinly veiled hostility. "Your reluctance to share the lake is causing tension in the community," she wrote in one email. Tension. Was she serious? The only tension came from strangers trampling my space and acting like I didn't exist. By the end of the month, frustration had turned into anger. Every time I saw someone trespassing on what I considered my sanctuary, bitterness bubbled inside me. This wasn't just a lake. It was supposed to be my escape, my little piece of paradise. Now it felt like I was living in a zoo, constantly on display while others did as they pleased. Something had to change. But how could I reclaim my peace without starting a war with the entire neighborhood? The breaking point came on a Saturday morning when I woke up to find not one, but 3 families gathered by the lake. Their cars were parked haphazardly along my driveway, blocking access to my garage. Kids ran around screaming, kicking soccer balls that landed dangerously close to my flower beds. Someone had set up a portable grill near the water's edge, filling the air with the smell of burning charcoal. It was chaos, complete and utter chaos. I stood at my kitchen window, gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was an invasion. My sanctuary, the place I'd dreamed of for months, had been reduced to a chaotic gathering spot for people who didn't seem to care about anything except their own enjoyment. And worst of all, they acted like they had every right to be there. That's when I decided enough was enough. Later that day, after the crowds finally dispersed, I called a local contractor. "I need a fence," I told him firmly. "A tall one, around the entire perimeter of the lake." He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my request, but he didn't ask questions. We agreed on 8-foot-high wooden panels with reinforced posts and a heavy-duty padlock for the gate. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. If this was what it took to reclaim my peace, then so be it. The construction began early Monday morning. The sound of hammering echoed through the neighborhood, as workers erected the sturdy barrier between my property and the rest of the world. By Tuesday afternoon, the job was done. I stepped back and admired the result. A solid, imposing fence that made it crystal clear where my land ended and everyone else's began. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe now people would get the message and leave me alone. But if I thought the fence would solve everything, I was wrong. Barely 24 hours passed before the backlash started rolling in. When neighbors arrived to find themselves locked out, their reactions ranged from disbelief to outright fury. Notes appeared taped to my front door, accusing me of being selfish, unreasonable, and anti-community. One particularly nasty letter read, "You're ruining the spirit of Willow Creek." Others demanded I remove the fence immediately or face consequences. Patricia, predictably, led the charge. She showed up at my house later that week, her face flushed red with indignation. Her clipboard was tucked under one arm, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing dramatically toward the fence. "You can't block off common property." I crossed my arms and met her glare head-on. "This isn't common property," I said firmly. "It's my lake, my land. You don't have the right to barge in whenever you feel like it." She scoffed, shaking her head. "That's not how this works. The lake belongs to everyone in the subdivision. Your actions are violating HOA guidelines." "Guidelines?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "How about respecting someone's privacy? How about cleaning up after yourselves instead of leaving trash everywhere? Does any of that matter to you?" Her expression hardened. "If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to take legal action." Legal action. There it was again. The threat she always fell back on when things didn't go her way. But this time, I wasn't intimidated. Let her try. I'd already sacrificed too much peace and happiness to give in now. As she stormed off, muttering under her breath, I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and determination. Fear because I knew this fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Determination because I realized something important. I wasn't just protecting my property. I was standing up for myself, for the life I'd worked so hard to build. And if that meant locking horns with the entire neighborhood, then so be it. The fence didn't just draw a physical line around my property. It ignited a war I hadn't fully anticipated. At first, the retaliation was subtle but unmistakable. Notes began appearing on my porch almost daily, each one more hostile than the last. "You're ruining our community," one read. Another simply said, "Selfish." Some were unsigned, while others bore names I barely recognized. It felt like every neighbor had something to say, and none of it was kind. Then came the vandalism. One morning, as I sipped my coffee by the kitchen window, I noticed something odd about the fence. A section near the far corner had been cut clean through, leaving jagged wood splinters poking out like broken teeth. Someone had taken a saw, or maybe bolt cutters, and deliberately destroyed part of it. The sight made my stomach churn. This wasn't just an act of defiance. It was personal. They weren't just trying to gain access to the lake. They were sending a message. And they didn't stop there. Overnight, trash started piling up outside my driveway. Empty soda cans, fast food wrappers, even old tires appeared as if by magic. It was clear someone was dumping garbage on my property, hoping to make a statement, or maybe just to make my life miserable. Each discovery left me angrier and more exhausted. Cleaning up after these acts of spite became a daily chore, one that ate away at my patience and energy. David tried his best to keep me grounded, but even he was starting to feel the strain. "Maybe we should talk to them," he suggested one evening as we sat together on the couch. "Try to find some middle ground. Let them use the lake once or twice a month." "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. "They've shown zero respect for me or my property. Why should I give them anything?" "But this is getting out of hand," he replied, gesturing toward the stack of angry letters on the coffee table. "Look at what they're doing. The fence cutting, The garbage. What if it escalates further? What if they sue us? Or worse? His words lingered in my mind long after our conversation ended. He wasn't wrong. This situation could spiral out of control quickly. But backing down wasn't an option. Every time I thought about compromising, I pictured those muddy footprints trampling my flower beds, the empty bait containers littering the shore, and the jet ski roaring across the water. No, I couldn't let them win. Not when I knew deep down that I was in the right. Despite the mounting pressure, I refused to back down. Instead, I doubled down. I hired a security camera company to install cameras around the perimeter of the property. If someone wanted to vandalize my fence or dump trash on my lawn, I'd catch them in the act. And if Patricia and her cronies thought they could intimidate me into submission, they were dead wrong. Still, the tension weighed heavily on both of us. Sleep became elusive, replaced by restless nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying arguments in my head and wondering what fresh chaos awaited each day. Would they escalate further? Shoe me? Destroy more of the fence? Break into my house? The uncertainty gnawed at me, making it hard to focus on anything else. One particularly sleepless night, I found myself standing by the window, staring out at the dark silhouette of the fence under the moonlight. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I being too stubborn? Should I have compromised earlier, before things got this bad? But then I remembered why I had built the fence in the first place. To protect what was mine. To reclaim the peace and happiness I'd worked so hard to build. And with that realization came a renewed sense of resolve. Whatever happened next, I would face it head-on. Because giving up wasn't an option. Not now. Not ever. I knew I couldn't keep fighting blindfolded. If I wanted to win this battle, I needed answers, solid proof that the lake was rightfully mine. So I rolled up my sleeves and dove headfirst into research. Hours turned into days as I sifted through old documents, zoning maps, and subdivision agreements. The real estate agent who sold me the house had assured me the lake was private. But now I needed more than assurances. I needed evidence. The first breakthrough came when I dug up the original property deed. It clearly stated that the land surrounding the lake, including the shoreline, belonged exclusively to me. That alone wasn't enough to settle the matter, though. The HOA's claim rested on some vague clause about common areas, so I dug deeper. I visited the county courthouse, poring over dusty records from when the subdivision was first developed decades ago. What I found shocked me. The developer had indeed designated the lake as a common area back then, but subsequent sales, including mine, had transferred ownership rights explicitly to individual homeowners. Armed with this new information, I felt a flicker of hope. But I also knew I couldn't take on the HOA alone. This wasn't just about standing my ground. It was about navigating legal waters I didn't fully understand. So I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rachel who specialized in property disputes. When I showed her the documents, she nodded approvingly. "You've got a strong case here," she said, "but we'll need to present it carefully." Together, we drafted a formal response to the HOA's threats. We cited case law, attached copies of the deeds and subdivision agreements, and even included expert opinions from a property surveyor confirming the boundaries of my land. To make sure they understood there was no room for negotiation, we filed for an injunction to prevent them from damaging the fence or entering my property without permission. When Patricia received our letter, her reaction was priceless. Or at least it would have been if I hadn't been so stressed. She called me repeatedly, trying to negotiate, offering compromises like letting the neighborhood use the lake one weekend a month. But I held firm. "This isn't about compromise," I told her bluntly. "It's about respecting the law and my rights as a homeowner." Her tone shifted quickly from conciliatory to accusatory. "You're being unreasonable," she snapped during one particularly heated phone call. "Do you really want to alienate the entire neighborhood over this?" "Yes," I shot back. "Because you're the ones who refused to respect my boundaries in the first place. If anyone's being unreasonable, it's you." Despite her bluster, I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. For the first time, She seemed unsure of her footing. Still, she wasn't ready to back down just yet. She threatened to escalate the issue, warning me that the HOA would pursue legal action if I didn't remove the fence immediately. But her threats rang hollow now. With Rachel by my side and a mountain of evidence backing me up, I finally felt like I had the upper hand. As the days passed, I noticed a shift in the neighborhood dynamics. Some neighbors stopped coming around altogether, while others avoided eye contact when they saw me outside. Even the vandalism slowed down, though I suspected it was less out of respect and more because they were waiting to see how things played out. Whatever the reason, the temporary lull gave me a chance to breathe and prepare for the next phase of this fight. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to imagine a future where the lake was truly mine again. A future where I could sit by the water without worrying about strangers showing up uninvited or trash littering the shore. It wasn't guaranteed, not yet, but for the first time, it felt possible. And that small glimmer of hope was enough to keep me going. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and I walked into the community center with my heart pounding, but my head held high. This wasn't just another gathering. It was a showdown, and I was ready. Armed with folders full of documents, maps, and legal opinions, I felt prepared for whatever Patricia or her supporters might throw at me. Still, as I scanned the room and saw the sea of faces staring back at me, doubt crept in. Would they listen? Or would they dig their heels in even deeper? Patricia called the meeting to order, her usual air of authority, tinged with something else this time. Nervousness, maybe. She glanced at me briefly before launching into a speech about community values and how my actions were divisive. Her words dripped with condescension. But I didn't let them rattle me. Instead, I waited patiently for my turn to speak. When she finally opened the floor for discussion, I stood up. Every eye in the room turned toward me, some curious, others hostile. I took a deep breath and began laying out my case. First, I explained the history of the property, the original deeds, the subdivision agreements, and how ownership rights had been transferred to individual homeowners like me. Then, I showed them copies of the documents, pointing out key sections that proved the lake belonged to me, not the HOA. This isn't about being selfish, I said, looking directly at Patricia. It's about fairness. You can't claim something as common property when the law says otherwise. And you certainly can't treat someone's private land like it's public space. Patricia interrupted constantly, sputtering objections and accusing me of cherry-picking information. These old records don't mean anything, she snapped at one point. The lake has always been part of the community. No, I shot back, my voice steady despite the tension in the room. What's always been part of the community is your assumption that you can take what isn't yours. But assumptions aren't laws, Patricia. Documents are. Her face flushed red, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Sensing weakness, I pressed on. I shared expert opinions from the property surveyor Rachel had consulted, confirming the exact boundaries of my land. I also highlighted the vandalism and trash dumping incidents, asking the group how they'd feel if someone treated their property the same way. As I spoke, I noticed a shift in the room. Some neighbors nodded reluctantly, while others whispered among themselves. A few even looked embarrassed, avoiding eye contact altogether. One man raised his hand hesitantly. I didn't know all this, he admitted. If what you're saying is true, then maybe we've been wrong about the lake. Patricia tried to counter him, insisting that emotions shouldn't override tradition, but her arguments lacked substance. Even her most loyal supporters seemed unsure now, glancing at each other awkwardly as the weight of the evidence sank in. By the end of my presentation, the room fell silent. No one clapped, but no one argued either. Slowly, people began filing out, avoiding eye contact with both me and Patricia. Only Patricia remained, glaring daggers at me from across the table. "You'll regret this," she hissed under her breath before storming out, leaving behind an empty chair and a trail of tension. As I packed up my papers, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The battle wasn't over yet. Not legally, anyway. But for the first time, I felt like I'd truly been heard. Whatever happened next, I knew I'd fought for what was right, and that knowledge gave me strength. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to return to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible after such a storm. The fence stood tall and untouched, a silent guardian between my property and the rest of the neighborhood. No more vandalism, no more trash dumped on my driveway, no more strangers showing up uninvited. It was quiet again, peaceful even, and I could finally sit by the lake without feeling like I was under siege. The HOA didn't pursue legal action, though I half expected them to try. Instead, they seemed to retreat into the shadows, licking their wounds and avoiding any further confrontation. Patricia stopped calling me altogether, and when our paths crossed in the neighborhood, she looked away quickly, pretending not to see me. Her once authoritative presence had lost its edge, replaced by something closer to shame. But it wasn't just Patricia who changed. Some of the neighbors did too. Over time, a few people approached me privately to apologize. "I'm sorry for how things went," one woman said awkwardly during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "We didn't realize how much trouble we were causing." Another neighbor admitted he'd only gone along with the fishing trips because everyone else was doing it. But now he understood why I'd been so upset. Not everyone softened, of course. Some still gave me cold shoulders or muttered complaints behind my back. But the hostility faded over time, replaced by an uneasy truce. Most people simply moved on, finding other lakes or parks to enjoy. Life in Willow Creek settled into a new rhythm, one where I could breathe a little easier. As for the lake itself, it regained its beauty and tranquility. Deer returned to drink from the edge. Birds chirped in the trees, and the water shimmered like glass under the morning sun. On weekends, David and I would take out the kayak, gliding silently across the surface while the world around us felt still and perfect. For the first time since moving in, I truly felt like this place was mine, not just legally, but emotionally. Looking back, I realized the fight had been about more than just a piece of land or a body of water. It was about standing up for myself, for my rights, and for the life I wanted to build. Yes, it had been exhausting, frustrating, and sometimes terrifying, but it had also taught me something important. Peace isn't free. Sometimes you have to fight for it, even if it means going against the crowd. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset reflect off the lake, David joined me with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. "You know," he said, handing me one, "you didn't just win the battle, you earned their respect, even if they won't admit it." I smiled faintly, sipping the warm drink. "Respect isn't what matters most," I replied. "What matters is that I can sit here now, looking at this lake, knowing it's mine. That's worth every sleepless night and every argument." And it was. The lake wasn't just water. It was proof that I'd stood my ground when it mattered. Proof that I hadn't let fear or pressure dictate my choices. And as long as it stayed there, shimmering quietly beneath the stars, I knew I'd done the right thing. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. Because sometimes protecting what's yours isn't just about winning. It's about staying true to yourself.